Hi everyone, welcome back to my studio. Today I thought I would share a full-length demo of this small 8x6 little painting that I did using the Earthberry Living Landscape set that I curated. But I am starting out here with an anchor pastel. It's a new pastel. That is the actual type of pastel I'm using, NU pastel. It's a harder pastel and I'm using it to lay in my darks. I'll be washing this down with an alcohol wash. I'm working on Canson Velvet paper. It's a newer paper to me, and I liken it a little bit to pastel matte, but it does have its own distinct qualities. I like it. I'm still learning how to work with it. You can see here that the way that I lay in my darks, it's all about blocking in the big shapes. This is going to be a mostly dark scene, and I'll talk to you more about that as we progress through different videos. But to me, it's quite important to have a dominant value in my painting. I chose to work on this warm toned paper because it's warm and I wanted a background that would highlight my lights because I'm going to have a lot of cool darks, these blue trees, a very cool ground where the light is not hitting it. That will really be a beautiful foil, that warm brown background to my cooler colors. You can also see that I very lightly sketched in with a pastel pencil my big shapes before I started laying in that new pastel. It's sort of a lighter blue color. And it really lays into this Canson Velvet paper. So just something to be aware of. It's almost like it kind of almost carves into the paper. A lot of pastel coverage on top of it, and especially washing down the surface with alcohol will get rid of a lot of those marks. So here you can see that I've started coming in with alcohol. I'm using essentially a calligraphy brush. It's a Asian calligraphy brush. A round pony is another name for it. I really enjoy using this type of a brush for a lot of my underpainting techniques, mostly because I can get either very fine details or quite broad brush strokes with it. And this paper, this surface reminds me of pastel matte if you've used pastel matte, in the sense that it's quite absorbent, unlike a lot of other substrates used in the pastel world. This really grabs the pastel and it's quite difficult to move it around. It really sticks and you have to get quite a lot of pigment on the surface before you can even think about starting to move the pastel. So I let this dry, and now the fun part, I'm coming in with the soft pastel. Again, I'm using the landscape set. It's an 18-piece set that I curated for Earthberry. They make lovely pastels. It's a small family-owned business, and their pastels are eco-friendly, so they're non-toxic, which is really nice. And I really love the shape of them. You can see they're a fairly decent-sized stick, and they have a beautiful, very broad side. I'm starting in with the darkest color in the set, which is that blue that you're looking at. And then I'm also coming in with one of the lightest colors, sort of as a roadmap, to show myself that I won't go any darker or any lighter than these two colors, than these two values. When you look at the method that I use with the pastel as far as mark making is concerned, you can see that I try to utilize many different types of marks. I'm using a very, very light touch because one of the beautiful things about pastel is its ability to layer. It's an opaque medium, but if you work with a light enough touch, you can get many, many layers, and you'll get this luminosity of layers. You can really see many, many layers underneath. I would liken it to glazing in oil or watercolor. You can see also that I've put in that very, very chromatic yellow where I'm going to have the sun peeking through the trees. I have painted this scene many times. It's a reference photo that I took years ago. And it's just, I find it to be a very beautiful composition. And I love playing with the same composition multiple times. So I'm quite familiar with this scene. And I think that there's something beautiful about that when you become very intimate and knowledgeable about a particular subject. You can really start to explore it and find new ways to express the scene that you may not have had before if you are just working with it for the first time. I'm starting to come in with some negative shapes here in the bottom of the tree masses with that salmon color. And that's essentially carving out those tree trunks. It's a mid-value color, and I'm using it because I'm working with an extremely limited palette, at least as far as pastels are concerned. 18 pieces is not very many. And it really forces you to be creative with your decision making. And that can be challenging, but it can also be quite rewarding because you have a very cohesive palette. It's very harmonious when you use that limited amount of sticks. I'm starting to come in with more of a mid-tone local color. Of course, local meaning the actual objective color that an object is in everyday life. And in a lighting situation such as this one, with the sun peeking through in between the tree trunks there, in between the trees, there will be a lot of light bouncing around, and I want to show that. So I'll be working quite loosely for a while with these different colors. And here you can see that I'm actually coming in with more of a neutral violet color on top of the greens. And coming back in again to reestablish some of the darks with that blue. Because this is a very limited set, that blue, as you can see, is not nearly as dark as that anchor underpainting pastel that I used, which is very, very dark. So with a set like this, I would recommend starting either with a darker toned paper or doing some type of underpainting with a darker tone, so that you can have those dark values already there and work around them. Unless, of course, you want to work in a very high key, and that's obviously not what I'm doing in this particular piece. Starting to come in with some of that light, that direct light that's being cast onto the ground plane. And there will be a lot of dappling with different chroma and value and colors. But for now, I'm just getting the overall mass of that shape in on the ground. And here you can see with that more chromatic, kind of bright green, I'm setting up a very abstracted horizon line. Just a little dash here and line there can really indicate a lot And that's what I'm going for in my with my horizon line. I don't want to draw it in like I was using a pencil. That would look artificial. So I tapped it in, and part of the way that I enjoy working as what I would like to consider myself as an impressionistic or expressionistic type of painter, I certainly don't want to use create a lot of hard edges in my work. And when you draw or use your tools, you pigment, your pastel more as a drawing tool, you get a lot harder edges. So you can see that instead of drawing, I'm tapping, rubbing, and sort of almost conducting my hand around the scene as I then kind of randomly let the pastel hit the paper and the surface. I'm using warms and cools in a way that may not be the local color, right? So when we think about what are the actual colors in a scene, in a landscape, the ground might just be brown and green and not have that salmon color that you're seeing me put in. But because I'm working with such a limited set here, I'm getting creative. And as long as I get the value correct, okay, so that salmon color is a mid-ground value. It's a mid-tone. And that's what I want in my ground plane. On the ground, there is a mid-toned value. And as long as I get the temperature correct, and I want it to be warmer than, say, those trees are, so it's a warmer mid-tone value, I can be fairly creative with the actual color, the actual, the chroma that I'm using. Now, with that said, I don't want it to be too saturated. That's a whole nother topic. But putting in, a fairly muted salmon, and part of helping it become muted is by layering it with those other colors that I'm using, such as perhaps the greens and other things that will naturally mute it down, because green is the complement of red. Moving over and talking a little bit about what I'm doing in the trees here, you can see that I'm coming in with that violet. There's a deeper kind of a violet blue to contrast with the light of the sun that's peeking through those trees. And I quite like the effect, a rather unexpected effect that violet blue and the blue is creating in what is becoming this very emotionally colored scene. Starting to come in now with an even higher valued, lighter valued green. I'm slowly working up from my darks to my lights, as you can see in this piece. That's generally how I work. Because pastel is an opaque medium, just like oil, working from dark to light in general is a good way to work. It's more difficult to cover an area with a dark after you've already put down lighter pigment. One of the ways that I'm going to create depth in this piece is by carving out negative space in the trees. And if you've followed my work for any amount of time, you know how much I enjoy doing that, how much I really love creating depth and creating intricacies in the canopies of the forest, one of my favorite subjects, by negative painting. Here I'm starting to come in with some background trees. Because again, I'm working with this very limited palette. I have to make choices with the sticks that I'm using. And I don't have perhaps the exact color or the exact value that I would want. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Limited choices force us to be creative. And so I'm using these muted violets to create these shapes of these trees that are farther away in the distance. And you'll see that as the painting progresses, that actually changes, and I layer quite a bit. And the shape changes as well of those trees in the background. But I feel that if you can use a light enough touch, that in most cases, multiple layers of color and pigment simply add to the complexity and interest in a passage. So starting to come in with some different warmer kind of muted yellows. What I'm attempting to achieve in this area of the light shining through is a realistic depiction of what actually happens, how that light bounces around. I've got this lighter peach color, and I'm basically using a saturation and warmth to show the warmth of the sun and show where that's coming through, because it's got more red in it. So that peachy color is warmer than the yellows. Coming in with a brighter salmon that I've used obviously in the background, in the foreground a little bit, and just using that as some pops of color throughout the piece along the horizon line to add interest. It doesn't need to represent anything in particular for me. I'm not interested in always exactly depicting things that are meaningful objects. To me, it's more about creating interest, leading the viewer through the piece, and I can do that in various ways. One of the ways I can do it is by adding interesting bits of different colors throughout the piece. So, for example, thinking about that little bit of reddish color on the horizon line. Coming in and lightly layering some more of the blue around the outside of the trees. This is a different lighting situation than, say, overhead or rim lighting or, different types of lighting. And because the sun is peeking through the center of the trees, that's where the warmth and lighter values will be. So I wanted to make sure that the outer edges of the tree stay cooler and darker. I really love doing this negative painting and bringing, again, some of the intricacies of the treetops, carving out those branches and trunks. And then, as you can see, I just took some green and went back over that area. So it's a process of going back and forth, finding the shape of those trees. It doesn't always happen the first try. It's certainly a layering process for me anyway. I want to be careful there's a balance between breaking up the shapes of those trees in a way that indicates branches and trunks, as opposed to just sticking a bunch of dots in there and making it look very unrealistic. I think one way that you could think about that is to go out into nature, go look at some trees, and you can see where those sky holes happen. Look at the anatomy of a tree. The sky holes generally tend to happen where the branches extend out of the tree. There will be nearer the base, big trunk And then the extending branches, there tends to be more holes and air coming through the trees in those areas. And then the leaves or the fur, the needles get bushier as they come outward, and grow outward. So thinking about the tree with its correct anatomy is important to get the sky holes correct. Starting to really work into my center of interest with one of my lightest pastels. I think it's actually my lightest pastel in this set, a very, very light colored, varying cool yellow comparatively to the rest of the set. And also starting to come in with detail is what's happening here, bringing some color into the tree trunks, which essentially up until this point have been simply the dark that I created with that underpainting. In a little scene like this, where green dominates, it's important to me to have those little red and pinkish colored foils in some spots that will take away from the overall greenness, if you will, of the scene. And here I'm using the side of the pastel and really working with some directional marks. And even though, the tree does grow in a certain direction, I'm using it to my advantage to sort of, it's almost like the boughs of the tree are arrows pointing down towards that center of interest. The light on the ground then comes up and around to the horizon line. And so everything that I'm creating has a purpose and a direction to keep the viewer's eye moving around the piece. At least that's how I tend to work. Thinking about shapes, interesting shapes. So when I really squint and look at the dark shapes versus the light shapes, almost like puzzle pieces, seeing how they fit together and if they make a pleasing, unique, interesting shape. I'm still thinking about these background trees, and I'm not completely happy with them, and you'll see that they end up changing quite a bit even as I'm nearing the end of the piece here. I only have a couple of minutes left to go, but they will change quite a bit, as you'll see in the final photo of the final piece. As I near the end of a painting, you can see here I'm coming in with a little bit of that new pastel. So I tend to really punch up my darks and my lights. That's how you really get to create depth, is those accents and highlights. So really looking for where I want to add some darks and lights to create the depth and interest, adding a little bit more of that very, very light yellow. Because this is such a small scene, it's just a little 8x6. It's almost just a little study, a little mini painting. You can only do so much. And in some ways that's good, because I don't want to get too bogged down in detail. That bores me. Although I do love, of course, the intricacy of pulling branches and leaves out of the trees. That's where, about as intricate as I like to get. But working small like this kind of forces you to stay loose with your marks. Just coming in with the final marks now. Really punching up those highlights. I love doing that. I love adding little accents around the piece. I'm coming in here with a very chromatic green, very, very chromatic and bright light. And that's just going to add a little bit of magic to the scene. It's going to, just enliven it with some little marks. I really hope you enjoyed coming along with me. I had fun. I just love making these little studies and playing with a very limited palette that forces me to get creative. Here's the final piece. You can see I made a few adjustments to the background trees. I had so much fun working on this, and I hope I'll see you again in the studio soon. Bye for now.